Good evening. Welcome to our final series of our Black History Lecture Series. Thank you. Had a wonderful time these past Thursday nights. We started with Willie Ricks. All right, don't lose me. We started with Papa Ricks, Masaka Dada, talking about the power of activism. We had the Jewish Federation. We did the movie, Shared Legacy, talking about the relationship between the Jews and the African Americans during the Civil Rights Movement. And then last Thursday, we had the Mountain City Medical Society in, talking about the disparities in black health care. Tonight, we have Dr. Clark White, who's going to talk about black history in Chattanooga. Thank you. Yeah. Now, we're certainly excited because Clark is very knowledgeable about black history and a lot of other things. And we get excited, certainly, having Clark here. Clark is a friend, and why do I keep cutting out? All right, IT people. Yeah. And we don't want this to happen with Clark now. We don't want anybody to miss anything. All right. And again, thank you all for being here. This certainly is the largest crowd that we've had in our series, and certainly we thank you all for being here tonight. I'm going to get out the way and do my introduction and let Clark do his thing. All right. Little house cleaning first. The restrooms out the double doors to your left. Arts Bill is here with the 13-page survey. Question. What? 13 questions, okay. 13, I thought I said 13 pages, 13 questions. And I got 13 questions written down. 13 question survey. You can either take that tonight or you can get with her, get the barcode, and take it later on. Also, we want you to know that Saturday is our community day. The museum will be open, and we'll be here from 10 to 3, and it's free all day, right? Free. Come see what we got to offer. Any other time, I'm charging. Believe me. I don't want to miss money, but they told me we had to do one free day. Okay. Also, I'd like to make sure that we talk about the Bessie Smith orchestrating the Bluz. The Sympathy will be doing this piece up at Memorial Auditorium Friday the 27th at 7:30 p.m. Uplifting black voices, both past and present. Okay? So if you get an opportunity, go out and see that. Well, you got Friday on here. All right. Well, don't give me something that you don't want me to read and tell about, because that's what it says, Friday. But if you're saying Monday, okay, we'll get that out the way, Monday. All right, thank you. So that's at the Memorial Auditorium. Our sponsors for this night is Erlanger Medical Center, Health Center, Health Systems, the City of Chattanooga, and the Tennessee Arts Commission. Now, thank you. Let's get started. Clark White was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee in 1949. He started his educational journey at Chattanooga Elementary School and concluded with degrees from Morehouse College, a PhD from Michigan State University, and postdoctoral work at Harvard University. He has taught at several universities, and I won't go through all of those universities, take too much time, including UTC. While he was trained as an educator, I think his first love is music. I really believe that. No disparity. I know he loves you. All right. I've known Clark for the better part of my life, having attended the same schools here in the city and living in the same community. Like most of our parents, his parents stressed the importance of a good education. Growing up, Clark was adventurous like me, spent time in some areas of the city that we should not have been in at an early age. While we always knew academic education was very important, we also knew that street knowledge was very important also. So we spent some times in places where we shouldn't have been, but by the same token, we got a good education. Clark graduated from Morehouse College. And while at Morehouse College, he was in the presence of some great African-American civil rights leaders. Clark spent some time around those people, and during that time, he gained a lot of knowledge about the civil rights movement and some other things. And we certainly was proud of Clark and the things that he was accomplishing while he was at Morehouse. The same way he soaked up knowledge at Morehouse was the same way he soaked up knowledge out here in these streets. And having been around certain people in Chattanooga, Clark became very knowledgeable about some of the things that was happening here in the city. Tonight, Clark would talk about some of those things, and I probably could conceivably talk about Clark the rest of the night and never touch the surface. But rather than do that, I'm going to let Clark talk about himself. And what I will do at this particular point in time, we'll present Clark White, Dr. Clark White, and Chattanooga Black History. Thank you, Clark.
All right. Thank you very much for that introduction. And let me thank all of you for being here. I am just so honored to have so many people, because I assumed tonight I'd be talking to some chairs, some empty chairs. I've got family here. I've got old friends here. I've got my buddy here. It's just amazing. And I want to thank the people from UTC for coming, and I want to thank the museum for having me. I also want to thank Eli for that introduction. And yes, we did spend time on both sides of the street, but that's neither here nor there. I'm here tonight, and I wondered as I was preparing my remarks, why me? Why would they ask me? And I didn't feel quite qualified. I said, well, why not you, Clark? You're a product of the city. As a matter of fact, your great-grandfather, the Reverend E.L. Pope, was a leader in Chattanooga. My late great-grandfather was a janitor at 2nd District School and the unofficial dean of boys during that era, during the early 20th century. But on Sunday, he would get a train out of Chattanooga and go down to Fort Oglethorpe, and he was one of the founders of New Salem Baptist Church. And whenever I get down on myself, I'll take a ride, and I'll go two places. I'll drive out to the church, and I'll look at great-granddaddy's name on the church, and then I'll drive to a place in South Chattanooga on 37th Street. And I'll look up at the sign, and it says, Carl E. White Place. That's my late father, who was a principal for years in the Chattanooga Public Schools. And they named the street after him. Not only was he a principal, my daddy was a consigliere. For example, during the Christmas time, my late father would go to all the known racketeers and numbers bankers, and he'd ask each one of them for $1,000. Daddy would take up $5,000 or $6,000. He would go and buy the material for the kids and bring a receipt back. And one guy, I said, why would you give my daddy that kind of money? He said, first of all, your daddy growed up with us. We all from the old West Side. Number two, your dad was very honest. He said, your daddy would come back with 2 cents. And if it was 2.5 cents, he'd take an axe and cut the penny in half and give us receipts. And number three, and I didn't notice that my daddy died, Daddy had a chip on his shoulder. When he grew up, he was abandoned by his own father, and they were poor. During my father's reign at Calvin Donaldson, and it was a reign because he was like the king in Alton Park, no child went to that school with bad shoes. If Daddy saw a kid coming to school and had needed shoes, that kid was immediately taken to Uncle Herman's. He had a deal with Uncle Herman down on Market Street. They would give him shoes. If that child needed clothes, he'd have clothes before he left school. No child in Calvin Donaldson was allowed to be in Calvin Donaldson that didn't get a full lunch. And Daddy had a reputation of not letting anyone come into Calvin Donaldson School and disturb what's going on with the children. I've met grown men since I've been back in town, because I left 40 years ago. I've met grown men who've told me this. He said, I have a job with the city of Chattanooga. I've had that job for 35 years because Mr. White, your daddy, through the National Youth Corps at our school, got me a job with the city. And he also took us to the bank and made us open up a bank account. That's the kind of guy my dad was. He did everything behind the scenes. I've seen my dad walk into the courthouse without an appointment and see the highest ranking judge there say, Daddy, you can't do that. He walked right on in. How can I help you, Carl? Daddy did a lot behind the scenes. And he was a believer in black education. And that's the topic that I want to talk about tonight. I hope I don't bore you. I hope not to sound didactic and pedantic, but let me give you my background. So when I did that, I said, well, why not you, Clark? Why don't you explain, and why don't you talk about the role of education in black Chattanooga and do it over a period of time? Because we're living in a time now in this anti-woke era that we're living in. I want to stay awake. And we need to understand the roots of being awake, which take us back to the post-Civil War period, the period of Reconstruction. The most important amendments to the Constitution happened and were important in black Chattanooga. The 13th Amendment ends slavery. The 14th Amendment institutes due process. And the 15th issues the right to vote. Let's talk about Chattanooga in that era of Reconstruction. Reconstruction was the period when America had its last chance to really experience democracy. African Americans had moved into political positions. African Americans had made advances in economics. African Americans had made advances in education. But it was only a short period of time, maybe 1865 to 1881, then all hell broke loose and we saw the rise of white supremacy. But what happens with education in black Chattanooga? Well, the population is important. The black population in Chattanooga in 1865 for 1 year was larger than the white population. Blacks were located primarily in an area north of the river called Camp Contraband. It's near Coolidge Park, and there is a plaque that recognizes Camp Contraband. African Americans who came to Camp Contraband were escaping from the plantation. I always told my students this: if you wanted to understand what was going on with black people, they went from plantation to plant. They went from soil to cement. They went from cotton to concrete. So the story of early black education in Chattanooga revolves around Howard School. Howard School was founded in the late 1900s as a part of Reconstruction. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the model for American public education comes out of the era of Reconstruction in the southern United States. The idea of a free public education has its roots in Reconstruction. So in Chattanooga, you had the Howard School, whose responsibility it was to educate formerly enslaved Africans. You also had Grant University, which became the University of Chattanooga. And there's a story in that. I read some of the work of a historian. His name was Steve Gold. He used to be a professor at UTC. And what Gold uncovered was that there was a black presence at Grant University in the late 1890s. 3 or 4 qualified professors of African American descent and students showed up. People wouldn't acknowledge them. People wouldn't shake their hands. People simply ignored them. So therefore, there was very little active presence of African Americans in early 20th century UTC. But under Reconstruction, the idea of a free and public education for the masses was an idea in the Jim Crow South. But as I said, it ended. And it ended very badly. Reconstruction was dismantled, and we see the rise of white supremacy. We see the rise of Jim Crow, and we see the rise of segregation. And then there became segregated schools in Chattanooga. There was the Main Street School, which was an early institution that was very, very famous in Chattanooga. And the majority of the black population in Chattanooga at that time lived on the west side of town, in areas between Blue Goose Holler at the end of M.L. King and Tannery Flats behind the Crane Foundry. Chattanooga at that time looked like the Garden District in New Orleans. It was a multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-class neighborhood. But there was segregation in the early public schools. There was also this question among blacks themselves in the early 20th century about education and the role that education played. You must remember, this is only 50 years from a time when it was illegal to teach African Americans how to read and write. And that's why I tell young people today when they question the value of school, I say, don't you realize that less than 150 years ago, to have a book in some places, if you were African American, would be to invite death, would be to invite damage to your persona, and you tell me books are not the thing that you want to do? It makes no sense. But there was a debate in early 20th century black America, among blacks themselves, even in Chattanooga. It was a question of education impacting the character of black Chattanooga. On one side, you had the DuBois School, and on the other side, you had the school of Booker T. Washington. In my own family, for example, as early as 1924, you had people leaving Chattanooga, black Chattanooga, and attending college. My great uncle was the first in our family to go to college in 1924, and he went to Morehouse College, which I thought was unusual, and when you hear my next analysis, you'll see why. There was this debate in black America at that time. And yes, there was a debate because there was a black intelligentsia, there were black newspapers, there were black literary societies. There was a debate between the forces of W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. Which way for black education? What's important for us to know? Du Bois, from Great Barrington, Massachusetts, who had his first major contact with any number of blacks when he came south to go to Fisk. He was smart and was smart enough to go to Harvard, but his family couldn't afford it, so they sent him to Fisk. That's the first time he'd encountered that many black folk. And out of that education, he became, how could I say it, very erudite. He knew the classics. He knew Greek. He knew Latin. He was from the classical school of educational training. He appreciated the fine arts. So that was his school, W.E.B. Du Bois, who was affiliated with something called the Niagara Movement that later became the NAACP. On the other side of the equation, which way black education, you had Booker T. Washington, the Wizard of Tuskegee, a man himself who came from meager circumstances and was educated at Hampton Institute, but took it as his mission to go to Macon County, Alabama, and set up Tuskegee Institute. He was also very influential in starting the National Negro Business League, which had deep roots in Chattanooga, Tennessee. For several years, the National Negro Business League met in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Washington was very, very, very influential in the education of black Chattanooga. When you talk about the role and impact of higher education, you cannot dismiss what Tuskegee did for vocational training and higher ed for people from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Tuskegee graduates on this street, on this very street, had businesses that dealt with carpentry, shoe repair, tailoring, masonry, etc., and they were business people. Washington's philosophy pervaded this area. So if someone says, well, what's the political character of Chattanooga in the early 20th century, Clark? I always tell them, I say it's more of Washington, a more pragmatic approach of Booker T. Washington approach as opposed to an approach of W.E.B. Du Bois. Although they were both appreciated, and although there were people here in Chattanooga that went to his school, Fisk, the Washingtonian idea of do for self, take care of self, took a hold here, and they were also big in the Republican Party. That started in that era and continued into my youth with a man by the name of Roy Noel, who was a black Republican. So early black Chattanooga tended to lean more towards the Tuskegee model of an applied education that was more pragmatic, and education was held in high esteem. If you read the record during that time, when you were a professor in Chattanooga at a black school, you were given high status, and you were usually given the title of professor. which led me to look about and think about, well, if that's the case, why were there no historically black colleges and universities in Chattanooga? Why? Chattanooga, given its size, is very unusual as a southern town. Most southern towns of this size, of 300,000 people, around 300,000 people with a significant black population, have a historically black college. Nashville, Knoxville, Memphis, Huntsville, Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama, Fort Valley, Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, Columbia, South Carolina. All of those places had a historically black college. Well, I did some research on that. A couple of things are going on during this period in the early 1920s of where to locate the Institute for Higher Education for African American Kids. Where are we going to put them? The students at Fisk University during this period had become very political and very vocal. So much so that they became a threat to the political establishment in Nashville. And I'm assuming that the folks in Chattanooga in the power structure realized that if they allowed a historically black college to develop, that means they're going to have to deal with a black intelligentsia. And they're going to ask the hard questions about the color line. They're also going to disrupt the labor process. So you must remember, Chattanooga was an extremely industrial town. It had an industrial base, and black workers, black labor was essential to the development of the city. If there was anyone that was going to come in and disrupt the labor process, they were considered a threat and dangerous. And there were groups over time that challenged that. For example, coming out of the Jewish community, you had the Workmen's Group, and they published a paper called The Southern Workman. A lot of them were socialist and communist. They also helped organize along the factory fronts here in Chattanooga. I'm researching now, and I'm thinking that there's this talk that after the death of Ed Johnson, the next day, there's a labor sit-down strike. I'm researching that now to see how much the Southern workmen people, what part they played. They also have a cemetery on Missionary Ridge that's right next to Pleasant Garden. It's called the Workmen's Cemetery, where a lot of the socialists in this area were buried. So one of the reasons I think that they didn't want higher education in Chattanooga is that they didn't want a site that would lead to protest, a site that would lead to a contestation along the color line. So TSU went to Nashville. But interestingly enough, the president of Tennessee State, Dr. Hale, was from Chattanooga. But later, Chattanooga does have another example of blacks in higher education. It's a place called Zion College, which is maybe 6 blocks from here near the corner of Central and M.L. King, where Lamar's restaurant is now, and Park Place School. That was the campus of something called Zion College. It was a religious school sponsored by the conservative folk at Tennessee Temple. Zion College morphs in the mid-1960s. Zion College morphs into a beautiful experiment. It's called Chattanooga City College. And when I look at what happened to Chattanooga City College, I get so disappointed because African Americans was right there on the precipice of being able to control an institution of higher education in a very segregated environment. But Chattanooga City College was absorbed by the University of Chattanooga, and the charter was gone, which opened the doors for Chattanooga State. What am I saying? I'm saying that if Chattanooga City College had been left to grow and prosper, instead of having Chattanooga State, we'd have Chattanooga City College. And that's been debated for a long time, but that is my critique of that so-called noble experiment. From my memoir, Back to Normal, I began to talk about my own experiences in the education of black Chattanooga going to segregated schools. And I'll tell you a series of stories. It was 1954, and the Supreme Court had ruled that segregated schools were no longer legal in the United States. Separate but equal was knocked down. That was in May. I started school in September of '54. I never will forget my first day of school. My grandmother walked me to school down Orchard Knob Avenue, and I looked up at this huge flagpole. in this big place, and it was all black. And I was going to school because I'd raised so much hell at home about going to school. I was a big kid. I had only turned 5, and I had to admit I was a different kind of kid. I remember when they took me to get my material to go to school. They said, "Well, Clark, I want you to go." Matter of fact, it was right out here. It was a black 5 and dime called L&G. It was right out here. They said, "Clark, I want you to go down to L&G and get your lunchbox and get all your stuff you want for school." I said, "Fine, let's go. I'm ready to go to school, Daddy." We get in L&G, and they said, "Well, why don't you pick out you one of those nice lunch boxes?" So, because all the kids had the Mickey Mouse square lunch boxes and the Donald Duck lunch boxes. I didn't want that. I picked out a lunch box like the men that took to the factory, like the old gray work. I wanted that one. I said, "You want that?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "Well, okay, now get you a satchel, Clark, so you can put all your stuff in a book bag." I looked at the counter. I said, "I want that one." And people in the store like, "That's a strange choice for a kid." It was a doctor's valise. You know the kind of bags that doctors carry? That's what I wanted. And I carried one. And people in the neighborhood used to laugh at this. Here comes this kid with this lunchbox and this valise. In the first grade, I looked like a little professor coming up to here because I would get my daddy's old hats. And I will forget the lady at the bookmobile. The lady at the bookmobile would always see me coming, and she would kind of turn her head. And I'll tell you why. And I hope I'm not digressing. The lady at the bookmobile would always look at me strange because of the books I got. And all the books I ever read were about gangsters. And my favorite book was this 300-page book on Al Capone. And the lady said, "Well, we have other books. We have books on baseball, and we have books on nature." She said, "Well, don't you want something else?" I said, "Yes. Could you see if you could find me a book on, what was his name?" I said, "Would you see if you could find me a book on Frank Nitti?" Frank Nitti was Al Capone's partner. That lady looked at me like, this little boy has lost his fucking mind. and every time I would come to the bookmobile, I could see her hitting the lady. Here he comes again. Here he comes again. And that's all I ever wanted. "You got any more books on bank robbers? You got any books on Las Vegas?" I got home with my Al Capone book, and my dear mother, and I'm going to get back to the top, my dear mother, bless her heart, she came in my room. She said, "Baby?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Yeah, I see you getting books from the bookmobile." I said, "Yes, ma'am, I'm loving them." She said, "Well, baby, why do you read these books that are so dark?" I said, "Mom, because I just love them." She said, "Well, baby, the next time, get a book on baseball." That was the era that I started school. Remember now, this is also the era for me as a little black boy of Emmett Till's murder. And I never will forget looking at that Jet magazine with my friends. We were out on 5th Street, Lamont Vaughn and I, and maybe Nikki Alfred, when the Jet magazine published the picture of Emmett Till. Oh, for those of you who don't know, when Emmett Till was killed, his mother decided to have an open casket to show how they had just ruined and defaced and mangled his face. How does that play in the mind of a 7-year-old black kid? I mean, it had a hell of an impact on us. I never will forget that era of white supremacy and in that civil rights period of white terrorism when these things occurred. And that had an effect on me as a young man, and it had an effect on us as young black folk. That was also the era in Chattanooga of the sit-ins. We didn't have a black college here, but we had high school students who challenged Jim Crow. I remember sitting outside the juvenile jail, listening to the students inside singing as my father wrote the bonds for them to be released from jail. So there was this struggle in Chattanooga to desegregate public accommodations, but there was also white terrorism. Early one Saturday morning, I never will forget it. My dad came to my bed and shook me and said, "Wake up." I was maybe 8 years old. "Wake up." "Fine, what you want, Pop? Put your clothes on. We got to go somewhere." And I heard my mother in the background saying, "Please, please, Carl, don't take him out there. Don't take him out there." And I heard my dad say, no, this is something he has to see. Get up. Put your clothes on. So we get in the car and we start riding towards South Chattanooga. I'm not paying much attention. I'm having fun because Daddy had a very raggedy car. He had a hole in the floor. And I used to like to take marbles and drop them through the floor. That was my big entertainment. You know, I don't know where we going, man. I'm having a good time, man. Daddy turns the car on Market Street. He gets near Howard School and he turns again. As we're coming down the side of Howard School, I'm noticing there are 2 fire trucks, a couple of police cars, and a bunch of public service workers milling around the school. Then I look over to the school, and I see the school has been destroyed. The back of Howard School, the elementary wing, is blown up. Daddy parks the car. He gets out of the car. Of course, he knows everybody. He speaks to everybody. The fireman moves out of the way. He grabs my hand. He says, come on, let's walk. I'm looking like, Dad. He said, we supposed to be here? He said, come on, let's walk. My father walks me all the way to the end of the school. Look in there. And God, you don't know how that felt for an 8-year-old kid. I'm looking in the school. And I'm looking at desks where the top of the roof was falling in and crushed the desk. And I'm thinking about friends like Sherman Matthews and his sister who I knew. And I'm saying, my friends could have been in this school when that bomb went off. I could have been in this school. Witnessing that bombing shapes the character of a little black Southern boy. Did it put fear in my heart? Well, it put trepidation in my heart. Who are these people, Daddy? And why are they trying to kill us, Daddy? What did we do to deserve this? But that was white terrorism. And then that was that morning that we rode to church. I never will forget it. I'm just talking about the era I grew up in. I'm staying with the subject of education. The morning we rode to church, I never will forget it. Daddy cut the radio off. But I said, why has he turned the radio off? Because going to church, I used to always love to listen to my father because he played what my mother said was that countrified gospel music. Because, you know, my mother was like a high Episcopalian. You know, but my daddy was from he was from the streets. He was from soul brother. You know, he want to hear some gospel going to church. He turned it off. Well, later I learned the reason Daddy turned it off. When we got to church, I noticed that people were kind of milling around. It was the same Sunday that the 4 little girls, 2 hours earlier, had been killed in Birmingham. And I heard my mother talking about how the men of the church, our church was at 6 and Chestnut, and my grandfather and a crew had gone through the church to search and see if there were any more bombs. So that was the era of segregated education that I lived through, the white terrorism. What else was going on between 1960 and 1966 that would be significant and important to talk about if we talk about the education of black Chattanooga? Well, let's continue to talk about segregated education. Let me give you a fact about Chattanooga. Chattanooga has one of the longest running cases of desegregation in the United States. It's called MAP versus the Board of Education. The power structure in Chattanooga did everything they possibly could from 1954 to the early 70s to avoid school desegregation. I lived it. One of the strategies was to provide so-called separate but equal facilities. When I was 13 years old, the city of Chattanooga built two very nice brand new black schools. They built one at Archer Knob. They built one in Alton Park. Why? Strategically to slow down the push and the protest of black folks for integrated education. Somebody assumed, and I think they've been proven wrong, that if you integrated schools, the intellectual capacity of people, African Americans especially, would increase. We know that's a lie now. But anyway, let me get back to the point. So to slow down this whole discussion of racial integration in Chattanooga, they set up basically an apartheid school system. That's what it was. For example, people want to celebrate my old high school, Riverside High School. I said, yes, but before we celebrate Riverside High School, let me tell you about that inadequate place that they gave us in 1963. You were there. They put us in a school where most of the books were gone. All the chemistry lab had been decimated. I know for a fact I was trying to be an athlete that summer, and I was sent to the gym, to the weight room, and in that weight room they left us one set of barbells. I will never forget the clinging in my ear I heard one day as I walked by the gym. I said, what's all that noise? And I looked up, and they were even taking the name of the gymnasium off. The gymnasium at Riverside was called the John B. Steele Gymnasium. Well, the forces of Jim Crow said, oh, no, those black kids won't go to school under that name. They took the name off. So for about a year, we went to school with inadequate books, with inadequate supplies, but with great teachers. And that's what saved us. We had great, very, very smart, as a matter of fact, overeducated teachers, which was one of the contradictions. Let me explain that. Behind segregated walls, there were a core of people who decided to become public school teachers in Chattanooga. Among those people who decided to become public school teachers, a lot of those teachers went off in the summer or after they finished their baccalaureate degrees and went to places like NYU and Columbia. It was not unusual to go into an African-American school and find a graduate of Columbia or New York University. My 8th grade English teacher, for example, Mr. Bernard Burke at Orchard Knob Junior High, in the summertime was a professor at Atlanta University in English. What's my point? Behind segregated walls, we had great teachers, and that brought up a lot of contradictions. I remember some of the contradictions because everybody assumed that black folks were inferior. We keep the school segregated. When I was in school, several things happened to disprove that. I call them the contradictions. One was that when I was in school and we were in school, a black woman, her name was Albertine Bikes, won the science fair. And that was unheard of. She won the science fair, and blacks were highly represented in the science fair. Oh, let me explain, I'm sorry. The science fair was an event that was held on the campus of UTC in the spring of every year. And all the students in the public school systems were encouraged to put together experiments and display them on the campus of UTC. And the black schools got very involved. I even remember the Franklin Strickland Funeral Home loaning its ambulance and hearse so that they could load up the science fair experiments at Howard School under Mr. Frank Jones and take them to UTC. Under Mr. Frank Jones, who was a hell of a biology teacher, African-American students had to learn all 120 bones in the body in the 10th grade. And that's very unusual. So Albertine Bikes wins the science fair. Blacks are highly represented in the science fair. Number two, in 1966 in my class, our SAT scores were comparable or maybe higher than our cohorts at the other white public schools. Oh my God, what kind of conversation did that bring on? Because actually that made a good argument for separate but equal. Somebody could say, well, they were segregated, but look at the scores that the black kids made. They were equal to or better than the white kids. So there was a delicate balance that the power structure had to walk. How did these black kids score so high on these tests? Well, if you looked closely, it was the teachers we had, the homes we had. It was the values of education. Black folks at that time valued education. I'll tell you how much they valued education. In my era, when I finished school in 1966, do you know how many people dropped out of school? One. In 1966 at Riverside High School, of 350 seniors that graduated from high school, we only had one dropout. It was an amazing statistic that I will always remember compared to the dropout rate and the push-out rate, especially of black boys that we have now. Because what's happening now in the Chattanooga public schools is something called the push-out. After the 3rd grade, most black boys don't score very well academically, and by the time they get to high school, they don't get enough credits to ever graduate. They just stay in school as long as they can. I know because I was a part of a project that dealt with this about 15 years ago through the central office. And what we found was that they stack up and become 17, 18, and in some cases 19 years old. And that's a bad rub to put them back in a Howard school with a kid that's 14 to 15 years old. That doesn't work. So finally, these kids either leave on their own or they're pushed out. That didn't happen during my time. Back to the contradictions when I was in school in the 60s. The private schools, both Baylor and Macaulay, were rigidly segregated. I know because I wanted to go to Macaulay. It was Reuben Taylor, Clark White, Samuel Jackson, Lamar Partridge. It was about 8 of us. We wanted to go to Macaulay. And as Franklin can tell you, that was a big debate, even in his family, about opening up Macaulay School to African American students. And then came the Model UN. Every year the city would have something they called the Model UN, and they would invite all the students, even the black students. And we loved to go. We dress up and we get ready to go. And the thing we loved about the UN is we could interact with our white counterparts. To the point I remember that we interacted with one of our white counterparts, and oh my God, he did not know the history of the Suez Canal. And I never will forget Sam Jackson saying, uh-oh, we got us a dumb white boy. Sam laid into that guy for like 20 minutes. Hey, man, do you know where Egypt is? Hey, man, who's the prime minister of Egypt? Well, hey, man, where do you go to school? You didn't know this? And then he'd hit him with another question. Well, if you didn't know about the Suez Canal, do you know anything about the Panama Canal? And the kid was just all shook up. And for that, they were saying, like, go get him. What did that teach us? That despite the color, knowledge can be acquired by anyone. We're not inferior. You just got us in an inferior place. Oh, do I remember segregation. Let me tell you another contradiction of the system of segregation. Warren Mackey and I had been involved earlier this year. We're no longer involved, but people had asked us to help write some words to go on a plaque for Riverside High School. And we said, well, okay, we'll do that, but you got to tell the truth. Riverside was set up as a segregationist school. It wasn't it wasn't something we want to actually celebrate. Let's tell the truth. Let's say that Riverside was a segregated school. That's what it was. How did that feel, Clark, to go to, I'm going to tell you how it felt. One day we were loaded up at Riverside, and we were taken over to City High. Now, we could stand in our school at Riverside, which is Chattanooga Arts and Sciences. We could look over the river and see a brand new school, but it was all white. That was Chattanooga High School. That was City High. Wow. So one day we're taken over there to a band workshop. I never will forget this. We were taken to the band room, and the first thing we noticed when we got to the band room, it was, wow, these guys have sousaphones and tubas. Let me explain that. Tubas are classical instruments that play in the lower register. They're big things. They go up like that. Sousaphones are the big horns you see marching band. Well, City High had 6 sousaphones and 6 tubas. We had 3 fiberglass tubas. When the lecture started, they put us over in the corner, and the man that was lecturing to the City High kids turned his back to us. Oh, my God. Why are we here? Why should we be subject to this? Well, my band director had to follow his boss and do what he was told. But when we got back to the band room, my band director said, I want to explain something to you. I don't like what happened today, and I don't ever want you to accept your second-class status. We were not treated fairly, and in the upcoming competition, I want you to remember that, because in the upcoming competition that spring, we had a swing band. It was called the Rivieras, and we were the unofficial winners because we blew the roof off of Kirkland School. We sounded like Count Basie and Duke Ellington. I mean, we were playing our instruments. Why? To prove that we were not inferior. Now we're into an era of black education in Chattanooga that I don't know much about. I haven't been involved, but I read there's an excellent study I want you to get, if you haven't gotten it, from the Urban League. They've published some statistics that are quite revealing. We've gone from a time of blacks being extremely involved in public and higher education to a time that I just can't explain it. I don't know how to explain underachievement. I know that poverty affects underachievement, but what's going on, I don't know. And when you look at some of the statistics, readiness, the readiness statistics, the passing of certain ACT exams, in all those categories, the black community seems to be lagging behind. One of the problems, I think, is we don't put enough emphasis in our homes and in our churches or our religious institutions on education, on literacy. And I'll say that as a member of Warren Chapel AME Church, because a lot of my political education, a lot of my education happened at Sunday school. We weren't talking about the Bible. We were talking about the Civil Rights Movement. We were talking about Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey. We were talking about DuBois in Sunday school. So a lot of that onus is going to have to fall on the community. I do think that we do need a literacy campaign. If anything else in Chattanooga right now, we need to emphasize to our young adults the importance of reading. If you saw those numbers in that Urban League report like I've seen them, you want to go out right now and buy books and papers and desks. One of the things I always do when I visit people's homes is I come in your house, the first thing I look for is a place to sit and read. I'm looking at light. If you've got kids, I'm looking like, where in your house do you have for your kids to study? I compare that with European models. When I was in Amsterdam, for example, most of the homes in Amsterdam, what we call the living room or the room when people die or have funerals, you know, the dead room. The dead room in Europe is converted into an educational space for children. There's a blackboard, there are tables, there are easels, they're not only toys, but there's lights for reading. I think the model of being educated really has to change. I hate to say it, but I live in a place, as Erykah Badu described, where church attendance is very high, but self-esteem is very low. We wear other people's hair. Nobody wants to talk about that. We are extremely anti-intellectual when it comes to dealing with complex ideas. And so there's a struggle now, especially in the area of public education. Charter schools, I don't know. I've been on both sides of the issue. Even when I was at Harvard, I used to debate some of my friends who helped start the charter school movement. In some cases, charter schools have done a very good job. But here's the argument about charter schools. Charter schools siphon off money that could be used inside public schools. But wait a minute, when I looked at the Urban League data, and that's a very good report that was done, by the way. When I look at the Urban League data, guess what school that's really doing it, there should be a model for education in the whole city? Girls Leadership Academy. I mean, they have grown by leaps and bounds. College readiness, passing of the ACT. Something's going on in Chattanooga we need to get behind at Girls Leadership Academy. Send them a check because they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, according to the statistics and numbers. Public schools I worry about. I don't know where we're going because the prison, the pipeline still seems to be working. If you can take third grade test scores from Chattanooga Public Schools and tell me how many jail cells you need, something is wrong. I'm tired of seeing our kids finish high school and their next stop is the chicken house. Nothing wrong with working, but, you know, can we do a little better than that? Because in my uncle's generation, it was finish Howard High School, walk down 25th Street, and end up in Mueller's and work in the foundry. So it's always been a question of the exploitation of black labor. And I end by talking about how all of this boils down and applies in this capitalist society that we live in. Social inequality developed along the lines of color is detrimental to any society, especially this one. So that one's ascribed characteristics, one's color, one's sex, and one's phenotype, and one's family is very, very much influential on one's achieved characteristics. In other words, your color, your sex, your phenotype, and your family. And I didn't say gender because you don't get gender at birth. I hear these newspapers, people always say gender at birth. Well, no, there's no gender at birth. Gender is a learned set of behaviors. The only thing we're born with is our sexual identity. Sex at birth, male or female, your color, your phenotype, your hair texture, and your family plays directly into what you can achieve in terms of income, wealth, employment, and education. And at the present time, we live in a society that I characterize as one of color pigmentocracy. In other words, in this society that we live in right now, dark skins do the dirty work, and dark skins get unequal treatment. Look at a hospital. Who takes out the garbage? Who burns up all the amputee stuff? Dark-skinned workers. Let's move up. Let's move up to management. All the managers of the hospital are men, and all the men are white. What about the surgeons, the brain surgeons? All the surgeons, mostly men, and all those men are white. So we can see color pigmentocracy in this society. And therefore, until we become a society that focuses on being anti-racist, anti-prejudice, we'll be stuck in this situation. And I don't mean to sound bleak, but that brief history of black education and that brief history of experiences leads me to the one last question. Well, what happened to you and your folks? And the way I look at it was luck, and we escaped. I think enough happened to me in this city to know that, one, I wasn't going to spend my whole life here, and number two, I was going to get all of the education that I could possibly get because I was never going to let myself be allowed to be marginalized. And I was always going to participate in the struggle for equality, for equal educational opportunity, and I will always advocate for equal access to educational opportunities and opportunities. I just met someone I hope to develop a relationship with, a young sociologist at UTC, and I told her, I want to help you, I want you to do well, but I want to remind you that UTC has never been a great friend of black faculty. UTC has a very, very ugly past of the way it has treated black faculty, especially when it comes to granting black faculty tenure. Don't tell me about black faces in high places because that does not always translate into any kind of social change for the group. I've seen plenty of black faces in high places that do very little or absolutely nothing. I mean, when I first returned, I had a lot of black faces in high places tell me, now go slow. Now don't raise too many questions. Now, you got to learn how to get along. You know, Clark, you ask too many damn questions. You rocking the boat too much. Well, hell, this is not 1935, man. This is 2023. Hello, in the valley. Let's make progress. So in closing, I think you see the contradictions in education. I think you see the problems in education. And I think you've heard from me from a personal perspective the power of education. Thank you very much for being an attentive audience and for dealing with me for these few minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clark. Thank you so very much. Wonderful job. If there are questions, we need you to come to the mic right here in front of the podium or the stage. Questions? Right on.
Wonderful talk, Clark. I want to know where to find that Urban League study that you mentioned.
It's funny,
I can get it from you later.
I called the Urban League, and they're not open to the public right now. I called the Urban League because I'd heard about the study, and I finally was able to talk to the nice secretary, not only in, they made a copy for me.
Oh.
So if you call the Urban League, and you might want to even give them a contribution, but call them and they'll tell them to make that study available to you. It's called The State of Black Chattanooga.
Thank you.
It's also on their website.
And it's on their website, but they're doing a good job of collecting good, hard data to make arguments about social inequities in Chattanooga.
It's called The
State of Black Chattanooga.
Thank you.
All right, you all, get your papers done. Do your homework now. Goodbye, UTC student. I see you sneaking out on me.
Hi, Dr. White. Thank you so much for just sharing your knowledge and experience this evening with us. So I've been in Chattanooga for about 5.5 years now, and coming from Atlanta is very different. And I'm a sociologist, so I, paid attention to the change in net loss of African Americans between 2010 and 2020 census. I've heard some, I guess, anecdotal comments about the friendliness or lack thereof at times of Chattanooga for its Black residents. And I'm interested in where you think, given your time here, your history here, where do you think Chattanooga's going as it relates to its Black citizens?
Well, I'm going to be frank. To a large extent, I think we've been ignored. I think for Black elites, those Blacks with education and credentials, it's a fine place. But if you're middle class or average and you're African American, you're in a place that, number one, let's look at what's happened to the Black population. The Black population in the last 20 years has been pushed out of where? Down here, out east. The Black population in South Chattanooga, off Main Street, has been decimated. So in real numbers, in terms of the inner city, the Black population numbers have declined. Who can take advantage of this new Chattanooga? A person that's well educated, a person that's connected. I haven't said anything about color yet, but I'm a person that's qualified with credentials, right? So therefore, I'm not, and it's funny because I have friends who are so-called movers and shakers and have the money to do that. But I'm not enthused about what I see going on in Chattanooga. But I don't know your generation. I'd like to talk to you more about that and how you all see what's happening. Do you feel a part of it? But I see a real definite push out from the central city of the Black population. And I see from reading these reports a lot of academic underachievement. It scares me, really, because I hope we're not moving to the point in Chattanooga where we have a permanent Black and brown underclass. Development is great for some people. We're going to have a wonderful South Side. I know, as a matter of fact, I'm a personal friend of the guys who are building the ballpark. That's going to be great for some of us. But for the majority of us, the ordinary people, I think we have a bleak future. Now, and I'm seeing this trend in a lot of southern cities. The Black populations have not only been moved from the central city. In Atlanta, for example, they're putting the Black poor on the periphery of the city. They're building these tremendous housing developments, putting a strip mall, and leaving populations iced the same way they did in France. The same way they did in France. They moved the poor out of Paris, they moved them to the periphery. I'm starting to not see that yet, but that may be the next thing that happens, because if you walk this street now at night, it's a whole different character, a whole different set of characters from the time Eli and I were growing up. And Eli says we were going in places we had no business. And now you got pizza parlors and nice restaurants, no pool room, no place to pull a tip, no place to gamble. Can't smoke no weed nowhere legally, Man, scary, man. Bad times. So to answer your question, the people that are really taking advantage of this new Chattanooga is a middle-class population. And people like yourself who are African Americans who are, in some cases, overqualified. But the normal, average African American person is catching hell. I mean, we live in most of our neighborhoods now. There are no grocery stores. And I have yet to read up on the data, but I need you to help me read up on the data about what's so wrong with the dollar stores, because there's a lot of criticism coming out of academic circles now about the dollar stores and how they're exploiting Black neighborhoods. I know it's hard to get fresh vegetables and fresh produce in most African American neighborhoods, especially in East Chattanooga. There are no grocery stores. I'll tell you another pet peeve I have while we're on it. At the corner of Dodson Avenue and 3rd Street, there's a bank called Truist Bank. There's no bank machine. And they're surrounded by offices of medical offices and hospitals. There's no bank machine. It's like para-apartheid. You have to look very, very closely at what's going on, even with public transportation in Chattanooga, which I found very interesting. Kids don't like to ride the bus here. They're embarrassed to ride the bus. Well, that's public transportation. So we've got a lot of contradictions and things to overcome. So while the city might be going gangbusters on one side, we've still got a population of poor Black, brown, and sometimes yellow people who've been neglected. We stay in the worst properties. I'll give you another fact since you're relatively new here. There's a place called Cancer Alley from the Georgia border up to Howard School. About 7 miles wide, there's a strip of land there that is so polluted that they've also found that it correlates to specific kinds of breast cancers in women. There's a black settlement called Piney Woods, where an inordinate number of African American women my age have died from a specific kind of breast cancer caused by the chemicals in the plants in South Chattanooga. The reports were made, but they were buried. The reports were made and they were changed. But the Environmental Protection Agency said in their reports that that was basically a cancer alley in that part of town. If you go out by Howard School now, you'll see those big vents coming out of the ground. That's bringing all that methane gas out of the ground so it won't blow up and burn the kids' legs on the playground. So we live in some of the worst parts of town, and I don't think we've taken full advantage of. I know we haven't taken full advantage of what's happening in New Chattanooga. I, for example, know of one foundation here that has plenty of money and no black people on their staff. None. No black people at all making any decisions at the level at that foundation. So we've got a lot to overcome in terms of institutionalized forms of racism and racial oppression. Did I answer your question?
Come up to the mic, please.
Thank you so much. I read that study that the Urban League did as well, and the literacy level that our students are getting, it was very alarming to me. And so my first reaction was, what can we do? And so reading research, it says, we try to catch between the first and the third grade, but something you said was young adults. So young adults, yeah. How do we attract young adults to get in a room and say, I want to learn how to read, or be transparent and say that I'm not at the level where I need to be?
We capture them where we are, and I think that's why our churches are so important. We capture them on Sunday school. We capture them in the recreation center. We try to have programs that increase literacy. We pass out books. We have reading. We teach literacy classes, which is something that can be done. I mean, they've done it all over the world. It's been done in Cuba. It's been done in South America. It's been done in Europe. I mean, societies have put aside money to have literacy campaigns. We literally have people going block to block to block offering literacy classes. Let me tell you about literacy campaigns, too. They're you have to really be serious about it. One of the things we discovered in doing the literature and the research on literacy campaigns, you can't miss a class. You can't miss a class. In other words, if you set up a literacy teaching people how to read, and you do it every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, you best be doing that for 4 or 5 months and don't miss. That's one of the things they found that throws people off and they quit. It's a hard grind, but we need mass literacy campaigns. The same way we go and support our kids playing AAU ball, which is, I think, gotten out of hand, the basketball, the football. Let's be that enthusiastic about supporting our kids doing spelling bees, doing essay contests, having them read certain kinds of books. Because now we live in an era, remember, where they're going in now with this, against this anti-woke campaign, wanting to take books out of the library. Those things that we can't talk about. I probably couldn't hold a job at the university now because of the things I talk about. They don't want you talking about because it makes people feel bad. Well, guess what? The truth hurts. But we're living in an era with this anti-woke campaign where it's becoming very dangerous to even think about what the possibilities. And it scares me because the same thing happened in the late 1930s under something called National Socialism. The man's name was Adolf Hitler. They had a lot of book burning. They had a lot of book bannings. So I'm for telling people to go read the banned books. Don't just read books. Go read the books that are banned. How could you ban the books of a Nobel Prize winner like Toni Morrison? You want people to just be ignorant? Now, here's another fact that I dug up about Tennessee, however. And as a matter of fact, I want to read this because this really gets to the crux of it, the current reform. This is from the Urban League report. On its Making the Grade data tool, the Education Law Center ranks each state on a sliding scale of A to F on its funding level and distribution based on pre-pandemic district-level data. Tennessee was given a grade of F on funding level because it gives approximately $3,600 less than the national average of per pupil expenditures. It was given a grade of C on funding distribution because allocation to high poverty and low poverty districts were relatively flat, meaning the need for additional resources in high poverty districts was not being addressed. So we live in a state that ranks very low in terms of education and educational resources. And that's a major challenge also. How do we put more money into public education? How do we put more money into schools?
It's wonderful to hear you speak. I came here from New York about 8 years ago. I am a literacy coach, and I work for the Urban League. And I want to ask you a question without offending anybody. I belong to a church too, but you know, in New York we pay taxes and we have a lot of services. That's why we have roads, and that's why we have garbage and services. And I see here a real aversion to taxes when taxes do good things for people. I know as wealthier people move here, they will demand those things. What I did was I looked up the amount of churches there are in Chattanooga, and there are 665 registered places that are churches that pay no taxes. Now, many churches do things for children, like at the Urban League, there is a church that packs lunch and snacks for these kids, that they should have juices and they should have extra snacks so that they're getting something to eat. Some children, as you know, the only meals they get are in school. But I would like to write a letter. I would like to go out and investigate what all these churches are doing for schools, because if they paid 3% tax, we could have fabulous public schools here. But we need tax money, and people can't be afraid of what taxes, you know, do you know what I'm saying, sir?
Yeah, but
I'm sure you could say it better than I can.
You're touching on a very precious, how can I say that? You want to tax the churches.
I know.
Your biggest enemy is going to be the preacher, because he got to pay for that Cadillac.
But isn't there a way? I mean, isn't
That's
there a way?
going to be mad with you. We're talking about some taxes.
Or how could those churches adopt a public school?
That's what I'm
Get together and adopt a public school.
From my experience, I'm looking at the churches and their resources as an educational place. And it's from my own experience. I learned about the civil rights movement on Sunday at Sunday school in the AME church from Reverend Archie Griffin at Warren Chapel AME church. See you later, Dr. Johnson. Thank you for coming, man. Let's give Dr. Johnson a round of applause, y'all. I'll tell you, that's the former superintendent of schools, and he did a hell of a job. No, we can't tax the churches too much. No, we'd be in trouble with the preachers.
Hello.
Hello.
My name's Awoke, and yes, I agree, people do be sleep. I am a senior at UTC and an Africana Studies minor, and when you spoke on Orchard Knob Middle School, I actually, just last semester, used to volunteer with InterVarsity, their Rare and Shine program, where we go into Orchard Knob on Wednesday mornings during like their free period, and we give them that kind of leadership, that mentorship that they obviously aren't either getting at school or at home. And you spoke about the push out that black students in Chattanooga, black male students are experiencing, but one thing that I witnessed at Orchard Knob that I found kind of nerve-wracking in the sense that we were there volunteering, and a white man from Macaulay had came in, and the teachers at Orchard Knob had gotten a group of gifted students together to meet with this white man and for him to talk with them about potentially transferring from Orchard Knob over to Macaulay, because they obviously have more resources, better departments and such. And I mean, that just speaks on to more of like the brain drain that's also going on. So could you speak a little bit more about that? Because I thought that was so appalling that A, he was even allowed in the building.
Well, now I'm going to have to be frankly honest with you about that. My late father, who was a principal, during his tenure at Calvin Donaldson, he also participated in what you call a brain drain. Whenever he had a kid in his school that was exceptional in terms of test scores, high, whatever the scores were, he was making a call and was usually successful in getting that kid either in McCauley or in Baylor School. And there were a number of kids, black kids, have come to me and said, your father got me out of Alton Park and got me into Baylor because of my test scores. So it's a catch-22, because I know going from Orchard Knob, and there's a lot of disorder there and a lot of anti-intellectualism, to McCauley is life-changing. It really is life-changing. So I have mixed feelings about that, because if I had kids now, I'd like for them to go to a public school. But, you know, what am I giving up? What have I got to do on the other end if I send my kid to public school? I've got to get a tutor. I've got to put more books in this house, you know. But then I've got friends who've sent their kids to the Macaulays and the Baylors, and they run into the same problems. I have a nephew that came home to celebrate at Macaulay his homecoming or anniversary, and he came home all shook up. We said, what's wrong? He said, I didn't realize how many of my classmates had on those red MAGA hats. I said, yeah, you went to Macaulay or Baylor. He's got a lot of Republicans go there. So it's a catch-22 you caught. But to answer your question now, I think the pragmatic place for those kids to be for their betterment, if they can do it, would probably be at Macaulay for their life chances, for them to achieve and get into better schools. And that's just a cold reality. And until we do better, that's what's going to happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Probably got time for a couple of more questions after this one.
Okay. Thank you for being here. I have I don't want to force you into a binary here, but I would like for you to opine about the continuum that you talked about between W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, because it seems to me to be a push toward vocational training instead of the W.B. Du Bois school of thought.
You here in Chattanooga?
Yeah, or in a lot of places, I think.
Well, I think, and I passed the other day in East Chattanooga, they've converted, and Warren Mackey can probably talk more about this than I can. They have converted, in East Chattanooga, an old elementary school, they've converted a school into teaching construction skills. What's it called?
Trade school. Hannah is doing it. I don't know the name.
Okay.
It's a type of trade.
It's a trade school. Once again, I can't knock it. See, anything we get now is better than nothing.
Yeah,
We're at that place now where there's so many black boys, especially being pipelined to prison. Anything that changes that pipeline, I'm for it. So if it's learning a trade and starting a business, yes, I want to do it. But once again, I get disturbing figures from that Urban League report. There are very few legitimate black businesses in Chattanooga. I mean, we do things with grease. We can do car repair. We can fix our hair and have a barber shop with grease, and we can fry some chicken with grease. But after we get out of the grease business, it's very bleak.
And one more question. I would be remiss if I did not mention Notre Dame High School. It's where I graduated from, and Notre Dame High School.
Right.
And it's the first school in this city that integrated. Why didn't you think about that as a school that you could go to as a private school?
It was too much religion, man. Too much. The Pope? No, hell no. I couldn't do it. I could. Even as a kid, I could not. That's too much. Too much ritual. Too much Pope. Too much. And then I was a political kid. But see, by that time, I had read about the Catholic Church. And if you know anything about the Catholic Church, in the 15th century, the Catholic Church issued what they called the papal bulls, Papalbulls. Those papal bulls were a script given to explorers for anywhere you were in the world, you could enslave people as long as you brought the prophets back to the Catholic Church. So all that stuff you see in Rome and St. Peter's Basilica, some of that came directly from prophets from the slave trade and the exploitation of people. I've been to St. Peter's Basilica, and what was so funny about it, I fell asleep. I was sleeping on one of them tombs. It was like, they said, wake up, don't you know where you are? I said, yeah. I'm in the place of a major world explorer and a major world slave trader. And people, oh my God, get him out of here. So that's what I felt. Now, that's my personal opinion.
Well, and I don't want to take it, but if I push back, there wasn't proselytizing going on at Notre Dame. They don't do proselytizing. Okay. So it wasn't, just to make that clear.
I know. And a lot of my friends went to Notre Dame.
Yeah, as did I. But I just, it bothers me that it's left out of the conversation. You say Baylor McCallie,
right?
But Notre Dame is not in there. Again, Notre Dame was the first school in this city to integrate. So there should be some props.
Okay, well, Catholic schools. I'll tell you something else with me personally. Catholic schools had a bad reputation because I had, and I never forget her name, Sister Francis. Somebody at St. Francis School used to beat my classmates when they were 7 and 8 years old. She had a bad reputation of being physically cruel to kids. Huh? Sister Mary Cherry, you're right. She was a hellfire at beating people. So no, I didn't want to go to Sister Mary Cherry and get beat.
Hello.
Hello.
This is one of the best sessions, conversations, lectures that I've been in a long time.
Thank you.
And what concerns me, he's a little younger than I am. So I've experienced a lot of what he experienced. I finished school here, high school, and moved to Connecticut and had a lot of children, got married, and then I became an educator myself. And then I retired and I returned back home, which is Chattanooga. But it concerns me a lot about so much still separation. You know, segregation's supposed to be over with, but so much, you know, she's this way and he's that way. And when I see people getting scholarships, I think about the students who didn't. You know, what are they thinking about themselves? I'm not useful. You know, I would never accomplish anything. And when I was supervising a program, when I was in education called the Indoor Suspension Program, that was to prevent kids from, when they're suspended for mostly their behavior, they didn't come back. They dropped out of school. I'm just giving things that's been on my mind for a long time. And so what we did, and it also went in the New York Times, is that every time a student progressed, even if they were making all D's, they went up to a C. We honored them every 6 weeks. And if they went from that C to a B, you know, we honored them. We had more parents to come in during that time than they came for any other thing in the PTA to celebrate those students.
Well, maybe that's the kind of program they need to have implemented here. You need to talk to people about it.
I feel that they do.
Well, maybe you should join with folks to get that done.
And I also feel that this is, and I'm out of education now. I mean, I write, but I'm not, you know, employed as an educator. That, you know, people are always talking about this school students don't accomplish anything. That school, they doing so much. They're going so far ahead. They're going Ivy League schools. They're doing this. Okay, put the teachers together. You know, if you got the way of improving, you know, this subject, talk to the teacher who's having issues with it. Work together. You know, separation, I feel, set us back. It doesn't help us get ahead. Goodbye.
Thank you. Come on. Got one more question, and we got to cut it off. Two more. You got something from the audience in the radio land? Okay, come on.
So this question refers to more of like higher education at UTC.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing what we know about UTC's history with Zion College, just to give you an idea of UTC now, I grew up in Maryville, Tennessee, just outside of Knoxville. UTK was the school nearest me. And growing up, it was always like an understanding that UTC was the black version of UTK. And hearing this, you know, going to a predominantly white high school, I kind of got excited at the idea that, you know, I could, I guess, be surrounded by more people who looked like me and be educated by people who looked like me. And so when I came here, I realized that UTC was suffering from a severe case of blackfishing. For example, if we do anything on campus, there's always going to be somebody with I think her name's Angela or something. She's always there. She will snap a photo, and before you know it, you're on the front screen of the school's website. But then when I got on campus and I was in my classes, once again, I was the only black girl in a sea of white students. And so with that being said, something that I think is really scary, and for me as a black student who is pursuing education, I take it as a threat to my education, because currently there's discussions about allowing guns on campus. And knowing what we know about school shooting history and the usual culprits, and this is a predominantly white institution that blackfishes, that knows it's getting admissions from black students, they're still potentially allowing this. And so I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, so I'm glad I'm not teaching anymore, because everybody knows with my personality, as crazy as I get, I don't need to have a gun. Because if I had a gun, somebody's going to get shot. And that bothers me, because it's intimidating as a professor, too. So I've got a student looking at me like, hey, man, I got a 38. If you don't pass me, I'm going to just come here and blow the school up. Being alone is not different. I had your experience when I left the South and went to Michigan State. I found myself as the only African-American person. You have to develop a tough skin. You have to be very, very self-reliant. It teaches you self-reliance. You will, across the color line, though, develop friendships. You know, all of my friends are just not black. You'll develop, if you're a healthy-minded person, a plethora of friends of all ethnic backgrounds, if you're a smart, thinking person. That's what has kept me afloat in Chattanooga. That I've reached across class and color lines to be free. I'm always looking to make a friend. I'm always looking to make a new white friend. I want to know who you are, what you're about. Because that, in a way, disarms people, let you know, well, hell, we're human beings. What do we have in common? What are the things that we both can move across? Because let me tell you something. We're about to go to war with Russia and China. And when Russia and China cut loose with those atom bombs, they're not going to say, ooh, let me drop it on a black neighborhood. That damn radioactive waste is going all over all the neighborhoods. So all of that racial discrimination can go out the window. And I think I've said enough, because my wife is dropping her head. So it's time.
And again,
I think we better
and
end.
you were right on when she was talking about being the only one. I went to school in Texas, college in Texas, in East Texas State. That was a predominantly white school, and there was about 12 blacks there the time I went, 1967. So you know how it was.
Right.
Yeah, it was real scary, believe me. Yes, sir. This last question.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, have you been in this situation where let's just say you graduate from high school, maybe you went to college, and then you may have dropped out or worked your way back. You've been fighting with the union, and like I started with the USW, it was a lot of people that looked like me. But when I went back to UTC and I started college again, and I started with the union, I was the only black that was like getting involved.
Right.
Around that time. This was back in 2015, 2016. Now, I wasn't just the only black. I was either the only black man, the only, no offense, but the only straight, or the only man, period, or the only black man. I mean,
right.
Everywhere I go in Chattanooga, I was a minority.
Right.
Even among black people. And
well, that's a reality that a lot of us live with, though.
Yeah, I mean, how you deal with that?
I just deal with it. I just deal with it every day when I get up. Like I said, I see myself as a man of the world, and I feel confident about who I am. So I want to know everybody. Some of the people I talk to are staunch conservative and racist and white supremacists, and we have some of the best conversations. Although my wife will not let me go on hunting and fishing trips with them.
Oh, no.
She told me I couldn't do that. But I know some very conservative white ex-military people.
And I ain't trying to hold you up, but
no, but that's okay.
A wise man told me that slavery hasn't ended. They just got rid of the whips and chains and put liquor stores and cocaine and heroin and all that. So what's your input on that? I mean, you think slavery still exists? In that kind of way?
In that shape, form, and fashion, it still exists.
It still exists, and I've been a victim of that too. So yeah.
That's America. That's the world. We have Commissioner Mackey, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. White. I had wanted Dr. Johnson to get his perspective on how he got those 5s across the board improving the public schools. He's not here to address that, but the question I want to ask you, you alluded to Washington's, Booker T. Washington's philosophy, and you also alluded to DuBois. DuBois wanted more of a classical type of education, and Washington more the industrial type education. The young black kids graduating, do you see them taking leadership? Du Bois said the top 10% were to be educated and to save the masses. Where are we going from here?
I'm not as close as I would like to be because I've retired. I'm not as close to young populations now, so I wouldn't be the best one to answer that question. I do know that there is a talented 10th thesis that goes around, but I would like to see it be more than a talented 10th of our population. Once again, I think that we need to do one basic thing with our young people, and that is to get them to read more. We need to increase literacy before we do anything else. The level of literacy and intellectual comprehension has to improve. If not, we'll still live under that old color pigmentocracy where dark skins will continue to do the dirty work. In other words, you'll all line up and go to work at the chicken house while the rest of us go to Harvard.
Thank you once again, Clark. Thank you all
Thank
for
you.
being here.
Thank
We
you.
certainly appreciate you coming out. Again, remember that this Saturday is Community Day here at the Bessie. It's free for the museum. Come see what we have to offer. Our history side is a wonderful side. Talk about those African Americans who helped grow Chattanooga. Then come see our entertainment side. All of those entertainers who've come out of Chattanooga. Once again, thank you for being here. Look forward to seeing you at the Bessie. Have a good night. Safe travel.